Either you're somebody, or you're nobody.
Somebody had to be true, but they gonna get the truth out the book. It's not like the movie or something. They gonna get the truth out the book, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The book is right on the money.
It probably goes against all of his instincts. He was always one to stay out of the limelight and under the radar. I think that's why he was so successful.
Frank Superfly Lucas is one of the most infamous African-American gangsters in history. Almost every story about him comes with controversy or outright disputes, and even the movie American Gangster, which claims to be based on his life, has been criticized for being 99% Hollywood and 1% reality. That being said, Denzel Washington still delivered one of his best performances in the film.
Mean nothing to me.
What's he gonna do, go back home?
I don't give a damn what he does.
What makes Frank Lucas's story so fascinating is that for a long time, most people had no idea who he was, because that's how good he was at what he did. Unlike the flashy gangsters of his era, he operated in the shadows, building a criminal empire without drawing too much attention.
You know, nobody knows Frank Lucas. So there's no, oh, you gotta look like him, you gotta, because that's how good he was, you know?
But even at that, the real Frank Lucas was a whole different beast compared to the Hollywood version. His story was darker, more complex, and way more brutal than what was shown on screen. Let's dive in and find out why. Frank Lucas didn't just wake up one day and decide to be a kingpin. His story started in absolute poverty. Born and raised in North Carolina, his life was tough from the jump. He never had much, but the real turning point came when he was just 6 years old. That was when he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A brutal act of racial violence that shaped the man he would become. His 15-year-old cousin, Obadiah, was mothered by the Ku Klux Klan for the simple crime of allegedly looking at a white woman the wrong way.
Shoot and murder cousin. He's 15 years old. And you know what the murdering for?
Frank watched as they gunned his cousin down in cold blood, and from that moment on, he carried a deep, burning hatred for white authority. That rage, mixed with his lack of education, since he barely went to school and never learned how to read or write, pushed him into a life of crime at an early age. At first, it was petty stuff, stealing, hustling, getting by however he could. For a short time, he even tried to go straight and found work at a pipe company. But trouble always had a way of finding Frank. While working there, he started dating the owner's daughter, which led to some serious tension. One day, things took a violent turn. Frank got into a fight with her father, lost his temper, grabbed a pipe, and knocked the man out cold. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he stole $400 from the company, set the whole place on fire, and got the hell out of North Carolina.
He struck his employer with a lead pipe, stole $400, set the establishment on fire.
By 1946, Lucas had heard tales throughout his life about Harlem, an area in Upper Manhattan known for its vibrant African-American community. It was rumored to be a place of opportunity and magic, so he made his way to New York City. Once in Harlem, Lucas quickly adapted to the hustle of urban life. He started by conning unsuspecting drunks in pool halls, robbing bars, and stealing from jewelry stores. This continued until he was 17 when he crossed paths with the infamous gangster Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was a well-known crime boss in Harlem who, like Lucas, had fled the South to escape racial violence. His nickname came from a bump on the back of his head. Bumpy was deeply involved in the heroin trade for the New York mob until 1952 when he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison, most of which he served in Alcatraz. Bumpy was eventually released but died of a heart attack in 1968 while dining at a restaurant. Frank Lucas often claimed that he was Bumpy Johnson's driver for 15 years, but this story doesn't quite add up since Bumpy was in prison for 10 of those years. Bumpy's wife also said that Frank's account was only partially true, which seems to be a recurring theme with Lucas's tales. Despite the inconsistencies, one thing is clear. Before his death, Bumpy had been a significant player in the heroin trade in Harlem. Lucas, having spent time learning from Bumpy and familiarizing himself with the Harlem underworld, was more than ready to take over when Bumpy passed away.
I worked with Bumpy for them many years. 13 years, 9 months, and 8 days.
And it was the 60s in the United States, a time of massive social upheaval. The civil rights movement was in full swing, the Vietnam War was raging, and the hippie culture was promoting the recreational use of drugs. In the Northeast, especially in Harlem, the demand for heroin was skyrocketing. Heroin use in New York surged tenfold during the 60s, creating a thriving market for drug dealers like Frank Lucas, who was navigating this landscape in the late 60s and early 70s. However, Frank faced a significant challenge. The Italian-American Mafia, or the mob, controlled the main supply of wholesale in New York through their infamous French Connection. Most people have heard of the French Connection, but not everyone knows the full story. Let's delve into that a bit. The French island of Corsica, situated off the southern coast of France, has had a notorious criminal element for over a century. It first gained notoriety through figures like Paul Carbone and Francois Spirito. The Corsican mafia's influence and power skyrocketed during World War II. This was when they pilfered capital, assets, weapons, and vehicles from the Germans occupying France. After the war, Marseille, a major trading port in southern France, came under the control of a pro-Soviet mayor and was heavily influenced by Soviet labor unions, longshoremen, and dock workers. The French government, along with the United States, saw this communist presence as a threat to democracy, especially at the dawn of the Cold War. France didn't want to risk a civil war, and the US didn't want to formally invade an ally. They needed a covert way to disrupt the pro-Soviet influence in Marseille. Thus, a partnership between the United States CIA and the Corsican Mafia was born. Initially in the 1950s, the deal was simple. The Mafia would be protected from prosecution for their actions in Marseille. But by the 60s, the Corsican Mafia upped the ante. They forged a new deal allowing them to ship heroin to the United States for distribution, with the US CIA ensuring the shipment's safety until they reached American shores. This arrangement became known as the French Connection. You might be familiar with the Gene Hackman film The French Connection, which is often hailed as one of the greatest movies ever made. Although it's a work of fiction, the characters are based on real-life New York City narcotics detectives and Corsican mobsters. The raw opium for this operation primarily came from Turkey and was processed into heroin in Corsican labs. While heroin transportation from Corsica to the US existed before, the CIA's official sanction in the 60s significantly ramped up the operation, making it the primary source of heroin flooding into the United States, with the New York mob handling most of its distribution. So during this era, the American mob was the main importer of heroin from their French Connection. Meanwhile, there was Frank Matthews, another African-American gangster who, after being rebuffed by the mob, partnered with the Cuban Mafia to source H and coke. Then you had Frank Lukas stepping into Bumpy Johnson's shoes. Initially, Frank continued peddling heroin for the mob. However, he quickly realized that to achieve real success and maximize profits, he needed to eliminate the middleman, the mob, and secure his own independent supply of heroin. In other words, Frank Lukas knew that to truly dominate the heroin trade in Harlem, he had to go straight to the source. By doing this, he could undercut the competition, ensure a higher quality product, and, most importantly, keep all the profits for himself. So Frank set out on a mission to find a way to import heroin directly, bypassing the mob and their French Connection entirely. Just like he'd heard tales about Harlem's opportunities, Frank Lukas always believed that Southeast Asia was the best source for opium and heroin. Acting on this belief, Lukas boarded a plane and headed straight to Bangkok, Thailand. This city is located in the infamous Golden Triangle, a region in Southeast Asia renowned for its massive heroin production. Once in Bangkok, Lukas found himself at Jack's American State Bar, a popular spot for off-duty African-American soldiers. It was here that he met U.S. Army Sergeant Ike Atkinson. Ike, also from North Carolina, was actually married to one of Lukas's cousins. This chance meeting was the beginning of a significant partnership. Ike Atkinson, who earned the nickname Sergeant Smack, played a crucial role in helping Frank Lukas smuggle heroin from Southeast Asia to the United States between 1968 and 1975. The details of their relationship are a bit murky. Lukas claimed they had a deeply involved partnership, while Ike downplayed it, saying they only worked together occasionally and later even claimed he didn't know Lukas at all. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Anyway, according to the story, the two took a long trek through the jungle. After several days, they emerged to find vast poppy fields and heroin farms stretching as far as the eye could see. This sight confirmed to Lukas that he could bypass the mafia as his middleman. Here's what they supposedly did next. Lukas had a carpenter named Leon, a lifelong friend of Ike's from North Carolina, flown to Bangkok. Leon's task was to construct 28 replicas of government-issued coffins, each with a false bottom capable of holding about 6-8 kilograms or 12 to 16 pounds of heroin. They planned to fill these coffins with heroin and use them to transport the drug back to the United States, hidden among the bodies of deceased American soldiers returning from Vietnam. This audacious plan was dubbed the Cadaver Connection by the DEA. Frank explained that they had to pack the heroin tightly so it wouldn't shift around during transport, and that they chose the coffins of heavier soldiers to avoid suspicion about the added weight. Lukas claimed that each kilo of heroin cleared him no less than $300,000, which meant over $2 million per coffin. Ike Atkinson, however, disputed this account. He said that Leon actually hollowed out teak furniture to smuggle the heroin and that he only told Lukas they were using coffins as a ruse. A biographer of Lukas later suggested there was credible evidence that they did use coffins at least once. Regardless of the exact method, the heroin was flowing into Harlem. Lukas claimed that in total he imported more than $50 million worth of heroin and was making over $1 million a day selling it. Investigators who later examined his finances argued that these figures were grossly exaggerated, but the fact remains that Lukas was running a highly profitable and extensive drug operation. Unlike most high-end drug smugglers who preferred to stay behind the scenes and let others handle the street-level work, Frank Lukas was known for his hands-on approach. He would personally walk out onto 116th Street and sell his product himself. He was very particular about who worked for him, only trusting close friends and relatives from North Carolina. These country boys, as they were called, were responsible for peddling Frank's heroin, famously known as Blue Magic. This product was renowned for its purity, at least 98% pure H, straight from Thailand. Special Prosecutor Sterling Johnson described Lukas's operation as one of the most outrageous international dope smuggling operations ever. He called Frank an innovator for creating his own supply chain outside the United States and selling the narcotics himself on the streets. By the late 60s and early 70s, life was good for Frank Lukas. He had a lot of the police on his payroll, connections with the mob, and almost the perfect setup. In an interview, Lukas famously said, "I wanted to be rich, Donald Trump rich, and so help me God, I made it." While the exact totals of his wealth are disputed, it's undeniable that Frank was rich. He owned properties all over the country, including places in Detroit, Louisiana, Miami, and a huge cattle ranch in North Carolina. He also owned property in Puerto Rico, where his wife was from, and he stashed extra cash in an offshore bank account in Grand Cayman. He spent extravagantly on mink and chinchilla coats and mingled with celebrities like Howard Hughes in Harlem, and Diana Ross and Muhammad Ali in Las Vegas. In Vegas, he was known for both partying and laundering money. Frank often said that his downfall began when he wore a $100,000 chinchilla coat to a Muhammad Ali fight. That night, Superfly, as he was now called, had his photo featured in Ebony magazine. He drew immediate attention from law enforcement because he had better seats than both Diana Ross and Frank Sinatra. Reflecting on that night, Lukas said, "I left that fight a marked man." Despite having many New York City police officers on his payroll, there was one cop he couldn't buy, Richie Roberts. Roberts was a relentless investigator who would eventually bring Lukas down. In January 1975, federal agents raided Lukas's home in New Jersey. They didn't find any drugs but did seize over $500,000 in cash. Lukas claimed they actually took over $11 million but only reported the $500,000, pocketing the rest. This accusation has never been proven. Lukas was charged and convicted in both state and federal courts for drug violations and sentenced to a total of 70 years in prison. However, he quickly began cooperating with law enforcement, providing information that allegedly led to the arrest of over 100 drug dealers, corrupt policemen, and mob members. As a reward, his 70-year sentence was reduced to time served plus lifetime parole, and after about 15 years behind bars, he was released into the Witness Protection Program. Ike Atkinson's downfall came in 1975 with a plan that seemed foolproof but ultimately went awry. Ike tried to ship some heroin to an elderly black woman, intending for an army serviceman to swing by and claim it as a mistaken delivery. However, the plan took an unexpected turn when the woman got scared and called the police, thinking the package was a bomb. This mishap led to Ike's arrest, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But Ike was a crafty operator. Even behind bars, he managed to continue his heroin business, thanks to the help of other inmates and some corrupt correctional officers. He kept the operation going until he was released in 2007. Ike lived out the rest of his days quietly and passed away in 2014 at the ripe old age of 88. Frank Lukas, on the other hand, didn't manage to stay out of trouble for long. Despite getting a second chance through the Witness Protection Program, he was busted again in 1984 for possession of heroin, sending him back to prison. One of the most surprising and almost unbelievable twists in his life involved his old nemesis, Richie Roberts. After leaving law enforcement, Roberts went to law school and ended up becoming Lukas's attorney. The two even became friends, with Robert serving as the godfather to Lucas's children. Their story is one of those truth is stranger than fiction tales that no one would believe if it weren't true. Lucas got out of prison again in 1991 and managed to avoid any further legal trouble. His larger-than-life story was dramatized in the 2007 film American Gangster, with Denzel Washington playing the lead role. Lucas was thrilled with the movie and Washington's portrayal, although he admitted that only a small portion of the film was true. The prosecutor from his original case dismissed the movie as 99% Hollywood, pointing out that the real Frank Lucas was illiterate, violent, and vicious, quite the opposite of Washington's suave character. Despite the embellishments, the film was a critical hit. Lucas reportedly received $800,000 and a small house for the rights to his story. Not everyone was happy with American Gangster, though. 3 DEA agents filed lawsuits against Universal, claiming the movie defamed them, but the court eventually dismissed these suits. The movie American Gangster managed to capture a significant part of Frank Lucas's persona and the rise of his criminal empire. Lucas's infamous product, Blue Magic, became a staple in New York's drug scene and spread far beyond, firmly controlled by Lucas and his gang. His operation even included his 17-year-old nephew, demonstrating how deeply embedded his enterprise was. Lucas ruled through fear, a fact made abundantly clear in the film's early scenes. One particularly brutal moment was the execution of Tango, played by Idris Elba, which was based on a real-life incident. Lucas shot Tango 4 times in the head in broad daylight, a move that solidified his ruthless reputation and street credibility.
Where's my money? Red Top gave you the package. You're supposed to hand me my money.
For Denzel Washington, the role of Frank Lucas was more than just another criminal character. He saw potential in Lucas beyond his life of crime. The film became a vehicle to explore the complexities of Lucas's character. Washington and Lucas developed a mutual respect during the making of the film, which added layers to Washington's portrayal.
There wasn't a real pressure, you know. Frank didn't care. He was just so happy that.
In an interview with Reuters, Washington remarked, "Had he gotten a formal education, had he gone in another direction, had he had different influences, I think he still would have been a leader or a very successful man." This perspective added a human dimension to Lucas, showing that despite his criminal actions, he had qualities that could have led him to a different kind of success under different circumstances. The impact of Frank Lucas's actions was both devastating and far-reaching. His Blue Magic heroin wreaked havoc on countless lives, a tragic outcome of his empire building. The story of his rise and the widespread damage caused by his product needed to be told, and American Gangster did a commendable job of bringing this narrative to the forefront. The film highlights the dark, complex world of drug trafficking and organized crime, providing a stark look at the consequences of Lucas's reign. From an entertainment standpoint, Frank Lucas's story is undeniably gripping. American Gangster stands out as a crime film that not only delivers a powerful story, but also weaves in the elements that make it a modern classic. The combination of Lucas's compelling life story, Washington's nuanced portrayal, and the film's attention to detail creates a captivating viewing experience. The film doesn't just focus on the criminal activities, but delves into the human aspects of Lucas's life, exploring his motivations and the consequences of his choices. Frank's personal life was just as tumultuous. He was married to Julie Ferriot, who was also convicted for her involvement in his criminal activities and served 5 years in prison. Together, they had 7 children. One of his children started an organization called Yellow Brick Roads, which provides resources for the children of imprisoned parents. In his later years, Lucas faced health challenges. After a severe car accident, he was confined to a wheelchair. Frank Lucas passed away in May 2019 at the age of 88 in Cedar Grove, New Jersey.